I have before me the cover of the book On Death and Dying by Kubler-Ross, the 40th anniversary edition. And in that book, a foreword is written by Dr. Alan Kelleher. He says this: the book you're about to read was first published in 1969. It's a description between the exchanges between Dr. Kubler-Ross and her patients about reactions to their impending death. In other words, the doctor had pronounced the death sentence. You have this disease, you only have a few months to live, etc. And so she did interviews with patients and doctors and recorded interviews between the doctors and patients as they were told the news. And she recorded that a very common response was denial, that a lot of people denied the news. In other words, they got second and third opinions. Nothing wrong with denying it and getting second and third opinions. But denial was one of those things that they commonly responded. The other thing was they got angry. Many people that she discovered in her interviews, when they were told they were going to die, got angry. And some people did not, but most of them did get angry. Why me? Why this? Why now? I have a young family. I have my future before me, etc. Why now for this? Other people, she found that a lot of people bargained. That was kind of the third stage. They started to bargain mostly with God. God, if you will heal me of this disease, I'll be a missionary in Africa. I'll give all I have to the poor, etc. If you'll do this, God, I'll do this, or whoever their God was. Other people, most people, got a little bit depressed. They were not clinically depressed. They were sad that they got the news, and so she labeled that depression. They had a depressed state for a while because they were very sad about that. And then other people, after depression, the fourth stage, they finally accepted it, which was the fifth stage of finding out that you were about to die. Now, most of the world from 1969 slowly evolved into not what the dying have to teach us about death and about their feelings toward impending death, but it evolved into how we respond when we have a loved one who dies. And thus the 5 stages of grief was born and was accepted and is worldwide as fact. If you were to just stop 100 people on the street and say, is the 5 stages of grief true? 99 of them would probably say, yes, it is. They've accepted the 5 stages of grief when you lose somebody to death, as that, or lose a job or lose other losses, that you'll go through these 5 stages. Well, it's a myth because, number one, that's not what Kubler-Ross was trying to accomplish. That was not her research. And you can know that by just reading the book, right? You can know that. So how did it become kind of a law out there? How did it become that everybody accepted it? Maybe you've watched Grey's Anatomy. I could cite probably 15 TV shows or movies that reference the 5 stages of grief, more than that if I did research. But I know of 2 because I saw it. On Grey's Anatomy, I think they're in their 73rd season at least. There's one episode early on, because I haven't watched it in years, one episode in which it was devoted to the 5 stages of grief. Somebody had lost a loved one to death. They were going through the 5 stages. Frasier's another show that Debbie and I love, and we've watched the reruns of Frasier probably, 1,000 times, exaggerating a little bit. Frasier had a whole episode when he lost his job at the radio station. Niles diagnosed him as going through the 5 stages of grief. He went through denial, then he went through anger, then bargaining, then depression, then acceptance. And so it's been perpetrated down through the ages since 1969 that somehow it is absolute fact that you will go through the 5 stages of grief. And it is a myth. I know some of you writing this will say, no, I went through those stages. Well, you might have. The people we've worked with, thousands of people who have lost loved ones to death and other losses they've experienced, did not go through the 5 stages. Very few of them that we worked with bargained about anything. Their loved one, for example, had been dead for a year, maybe 2 years, 5 years, 30 years. They are not bargaining for their loved one to come back. They might have bargained when their loved one was sick and in the hospital and maybe about to die. And I've done bargaining before. Lord, if you'll just heal my grandson or heal somebody that I love, I will be a missionary in Africa. I'll give all I have to the poor, et cetera, et cetera. That's called bargaining. Very few of our people that we deal with at Spark of Life have ever bargained with God about getting their loved ones back once they know they're dead. Very few of them deny the death. Some people do deny the death, and some people deny the death until they see the body. Some people do that, but it is by far not a common occurrence when people deny the death of their loved one The people we deal with, they haven't denied that death. They might have denied it at first until they came to grips with it. Maybe they're in shock. Everybody doesn't get angry. Some people do get angry when they lose a loved one. I did get angry. I have gotten angry, and I've been angry with God. And I used to preach about God, and I still love God. But I was very angry with God. Why didn't you stop my loved one from dying? I was very angry. Some people don't get angry. Some people do not get depressed. A lot of people get sad. And depending on your definition of depression, a lot of people go through sadness when they lose the dearest on earth to them. Of course they do. But there are no set 5 stages of grief. You say, David, why are you so passionate about this? Because when one accepts the 5 stages of grief as fact, and they don't go through those stages, they think something's wrong with them. A good friend of mine lost his wife to cancer. It was a very quick loss. And we were doing grief recovery work. And about the 4th week of our class, his name was Terry. And Terry spoke to me, and it was on the 5 stages of grief, the myth of it, that it's not fact, that most people don't go through every one of these phases. It's not a neat little 5-step thing of grief. And he was like ecstatic when he heard this. He said, and I showed him the book, The 5 Stages of Grief, and we read the cover of the book, what it was about. He said, you mean the 5 stages of grief is a myth? I said, yes, it's a myth. He said, well, I used to teach it. I said, I used to teach it. We were wrong, right? So I'm not going to feel bad about it. I do kind of, but I can't do anything about it. But now I know better. So I'm not going to teach it anymore because it's not true. And he said, I am so relieved. When his wife, Letha, had died, he assumed that he had to go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. He had never been angry since his wife had died 6 months earlier. So he thought he was stuck and he couldn't move on in his grief recovery until he got angry. If you've never been angry, don't get angry because somebody tells you should be angry. Some people are never angry at that. Many are, and it's okay, but it's okay not to be angry, right? And Terry said, I thought I didn't love my wife enough because I'd never been angry. I didn't know what was wrong with me. This is like a burden lifted from my shoulders. So if you're experiencing grief because somebody you love died or another kind of loss that's not a death loss, do not buy into the 5 stages of grief myth. You might have every one of those things happen in your life. You might not have any of them happen, right? So don't let somebody else tell you you have to go through certain stages. It's not that simple. It's not that neat. And there's nothing wrong with you if you haven't felt anger or if you've never bargained or if you've never felt depressed. Most people do feel some kind of depression, right? That's normal. So the next time you think something's wrong with you because you haven't gone through these 5 stages or you're waiting to go through something, don't wait for it. Give yourself permission to grieve and permission to recover. At Spark of Life, there is always, always, always hope. Go to sparkoflife.org for more grief help. I'm David Matthews with Spark of Life, and I want to remind you of something. There's always hope.